To me, one of the big things about music is it's this avenue to continue to grow. I think one of the things that just keeps you getting out of bed every morning is some kind of growth. And it could be personal growth. It could be any number of kinds of things. But in my case, music was like the main vehicle for growth. And this was this chance to grow in ways that I was not capable of imagining myself at the time.
There has got to be more than this.
Welcome to the Morse Code Podcast, where we talk with entrepreneurially minded creatives in music, film, and writing. My name's Corby, and I'm hoping these conversations inspire you to push deeper into your own work, whether you're a full-time professional or just starting out on your own creative odyssey. Our first ever live show celebrating 6 months of the Morse Code Podcast is in just a few days. It's happening Sunday, April 14th at the 5 Spot here in East Nashville. It features a who's who of many of the guests we've had on the show, folks like Bill Miller, Jill Andrews, Boo Ray, Abigail Comps, plus writers Amy McConnell and Julian Lage, plus live painting from twin brothers Nathan and Judd Epting, collectively known as the Plein Air Ramblers. We're going to put a ticket link right up at the top of the page. Just hit morsecodepodcast.com. Right there, you can just see it. I'll just wait for you to click that thing right there. Okay. I'll be at Club Passim in Cambridge near Boston on April 16th. And after that, I'm heading down to the New Bedford Film Festival to screen our TV pilot, Morse Code. That happens April 18th. It's on my website. I just found out we're up for several awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Original Song for the song I wrote with Megan McCormick, a song called Got to Be More, which happens to be the theme for this year's podcast. Tickets for all that stuff is on my website, CorbyLanker.com. Done with the advertising. Okay, I'm really excited to bring you this conversation with Grammy award-winning guitarist and singer, member of the Punch Brothers, Mighty Poplar, and frequent Julian Lage collaborator, Chris Critter Eldridge. Chris has won loads of awards, including Instrumentalist of the Year from the Americana Awards Association, and he's collaborated with Paul Simon, Justin Timberlake, T-Bone Burnett, Fiona Apple, The War and Treaty, and a whole bunch of other top shelf talents. We went wide and deep in this conversation, talking about his early aspirations in music and his journey to the Punch Brothers and beyond. We play his arrangement of Little Sadie and then just let one rip with the tune we got from a Norman Blake record, the classic tune Walking Cane Blues. It was a full episode. I'm really excited to bring it to you. If you get something out of the Morse Code Podcast, please like it with a click and subscribe. And now here's my conversation with Chris Critter Eldridge. Chris Eldridge, Critter Eldridge, thank you so much for popping over to my old house.
Happy to be here. I love your house.
You jumped in with a compliment and I knew everything was going to be okay.
Yeah.
From there on out. And man, I'm just so excited I'm always excited to see you. I feel like I see you once to twice a year, you or Kristen. But that's happened over 10 years. And so we have a long friendship going back.
Longer than that. I first met you when I was in the String Dusters, I think. Is this possible? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, very possible.
I mean, because you've been here in Nashville for, I would say, that would be at least 16, 17 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I met you with Bryn.
Oh,
at the Station Inn.
Was that the night you guys did the Bela Fleck Drive tribute?
It might have been on Halloween.
The Halloween show?
Yeah.
Which was one of my favorite shows of all time. And I think I was there with another friend of mine, Craig Shelburne, great music writer and critic here in town. And we enjoyed the dress up side of it together. But the part that I had to explain to him afterwards, I'm like, no, they're actually quoting the licks in the solos of their respective players, which was another layer of bluegrass nerddom. But
yeah, what we did for anybody listening who doesn't know what we're talking about, like there's this great Bela Fleck instrumental bluegrass record called Drive, which is for people like me who are like kind of progressive bluegrass players. This was, a biblical album. It came out in 1988. It's Bela on banjo, obviously, Tony Rice playing guitar, Stuart Duncan and Mark O'Connor on fiddle, Sam Bush on mandolin, Jerry Douglas on dobro, and Mark Schatz on bass. And it's like this, it's just like one of the source documents for how you would start expanding, out of the box a little bit, but still keeping it connected to the actual pulse of real bluegrass, but expanding out harmonically. So anyway, that was like a real touchstone record for all of us in the String Dusters who were just, serious, pickers, but really liked that side of things. So for Halloween, the initial thought was, okay, let's cover Drive, but let's not just cover Drive. Let's dress up like all those guys, which we all did, but let's also learn all the songs on the record note for note. So let's everybody, learn all the stuff. And we actually made it, of course, in a way, I think we could have done it if we'd had a little more time, just because we grew up listening to that. It's like, that's one of those records where, to this day, I could probably sing you every note. Like, I haven't listened to it in probably 5 years, but I could probably sing you every note of every Tony Rice solo on that record. So if you can sing it, it's like, to play it is not really that hard. I think we actually could have done it. But I don't know. We decided after about, 4 songs, like, this is enough. We did that. And then Travis randomly was dressed up, not as Mark Schatz, but as Kenny Rogers. So there was a whole Kenny Rogers component that night. A little
flair off to the end. Yeah. Well, it was a great night. I still remember it. I was telling my wife Randa about it not too long ago, because it was just one of those Nashville moments of an excellent band not taking themselves too seriously for once in their lives. Yeah,
it was really fun, man. That was the Dusters. I left them in 2007. Played my last gig in August 2007. But it was a really, and they're obviously still going very strong. Mm-hmm. They're kind of like, jam grass elders now. We weren't really jamming that much back then. But they've kind of gone into this other realm. But that was like, those are my early 20s, my first years like as an adult, and I was here in Nashville after college, and that was a really good time in life.
There's some genres of you that it would be fun to hit without getting I feel like this is probably going to be more of a general audience than a bluegrass specific audience, but there'll still be people that are fans of you, so we can get a little granular if we want to. But it might be fun to start for those not in the know. You are kind of son of bluegrass greats, a bluegrass great, arguably. Let's just say Seldom Seen was a hugely influential band. And I wonder, what was that, to what extent did that steer you toward bluegrass, in terms of just like, some kids grow up and they want to go a completely different direction than their talented parents, and some kids are like, I kind of like what Dad's doing.
Yeah, it very much steered me in the opposite direction, because my dad was in the Seldom Scene, which this really great band, like really, really super influential band, particularly in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. That kind of original incarnation had this whole new way that they played bluegrass, and they were one of the bands that really kind of took it out of the rural context. They were all in D.C. They all had like normal, jobs that people in D.C. would have. Guy worked at National Geographic. My dad was a mathematician. John Starling was a physician. They all had these kinds of things, and they kind of brought the music to a rural, not away from the rural audience into kind of the urban zone. So the scene was really cool, and I grew up knowing that the scene was cool. However, that was the last thing I wanted to do, because that's what my dad did. And it's also what my mom did. They met because of the 5-string banjo. My mom and dad are both banjo players. And so, miraculously, I was able to be conceived by 2 banjo players. And there was always a lot of music around the house, but I kind of didn't really want to do bluegrass. My older brother, Ben, who's, I have 3 half siblings who are much older than me, but so Ben's probably, I don't know, about 15 years older than I am, but he's a really good electric guitar player. He played kind of like redneck rock and roll, like Leonard Skinner and like Molly Hatchet and Allman Brothers and all this kind of, he also loved, Stevie Ray Vaughan and all this stuff. But anyway, Ben was really good. And when he was young and living in the house in the basement, apparently I would, crawl over to the air vents so I could, like, as a baby, he'd be practicing down there and I'd listen. And I kind of just always was drawn to electric music and that kind of stuff. And when I got to be a little older, probably about 9 years old, my uncle David, I'd really loved music. I listened to it a lot and paid attention to it. But my uncle David played me this record by this guitar player, Eric Johnson, electric guitar player. And for whatever reason, that in particular, just like, fireworks went off in my brain. And because there was something so clear, I think, about his vision, his approach, and he was also very virtuoso. He's like a remarkable virtuoso. But like, I don't know what it was. I have no idea.
But it didn't come out like Stevie Ray Vaughan's virtuosity came out of the blues idiom.
Yeah.
Like, so it was so defined by that. But Eric Johnson was much more kind of progressive, and it wasn't jazz at all, but there was a lot of chromaticness.
Yeah, there's that side of, it's interesting talking about those two guys because I feel like they're both real descendants of Jimi Hendrix. Stevie Ray Vaughan obviously had all the, blues, the Albert King, Freddie King, like that electric blues thing deeply in there. And you hear a lot of that with him. But I also think there's a huge Hendrix thing, kind of that just like visceral, amazing, just blow the doors off of everything thing that Hendrix was tapped into. Like a real force of nature, I guess. And I think Eric actually was, to me, he was like Hendrix's, he was a disciple of this other side of Jimi Hendrix, where, the kind of more, just ethereal, imaginative, like dreamscapey thing. Cerebral.
That's what I think of with Eric Johnson, is a little bit more cerebral.
Yeah, he's definitely cerebral, but there's a visceral thing in there. And I don't know, for whatever reason, that really spoke to me. I mean, my mom and I used to listen to a lot of like Glenn Gould playing Bach in the car. That was like a real kind of core thing. A lot of Oscar Peterson. There was a lot of like classical music and jazz in the house, despite the fact that like my dad, is a well-known bluegrass musician. We were actually listening to all kinds of, Rodgers and Hammerstein stuff and James Taylor and Joni Mitchell and stuff. It's just all over the deck. And something about Eric's thing, like really, that was just what lit me up. And it was like, oh wow, I really want to start playing guitar. Like that's really cool.
And so did that lead to learning the solos off the record, or was that more of just like? I mean,
I can't play those solos to this day. Like his thing is so different. Yeah, I don't know. It led to like a deep obsessive listening for a long time, and I got an electric guitar. My parents bought me this like, the cheapest Les Paul. There was a real Les Paul, but it was like the bottom of the barrel Les Paul, and that was my guitar. And I just I don't know. I just started hanging out in my bedroom, like listening to. Of course, this is before. It is really very different now. I sound like an old person saying this, but it's like this is before we had YouTube.
It's cassette tape stuff.
Yeah, you had cassette, or in my case, we had a CD player, and it was just like I had this CD player, and you'd hit the back button, and it'd jump back about 3 seconds, and I'd just do that over and over and over, or get records, and I just listen to them over and over. It was just a lot of like real obsession about
intentional listening,
super duper deep intentional listening that was really just kind of how you had to do it at that time. And I did that. I started doing that kind of from a young age, and then I'd try and figure out what was going on, and I never really could do it. It took me. I was, and this is not a false modesty thing. This is really true. But it took me like a really long time before I could do the basics of playing guitar in time. was never. There's something about the physical coordination. There's something about it that it just took a long time for the two sides of it to kind of like connect up. Whereas my brother Ben, as my dad tells it, took a guitar class, at school, and came home the first day and could play rhythm in time for my dad playing the banjo. And it took me like a year before I could like change chords in time. It took me a really long time. But I was kind of just really determined. And I kind of kept pounding away at it.
So it took a long time to get the hang of it.
Yeah.
But once it took, it wasn't a tidal wave with you and your the dawning realization of how to do it. It was more like a rising tide.
Big time.
Is maybe a fair analogy.
Yeah. It was just, it just took I didn't really notice that because I just loved it so much. For whatever reason, like this switch just got flipped on and I was so into it. I just really loved it. And so from my vantage point back then, it was just all like, wow, this is so cool. This is so fascinating. I love this. But I'm also aware that just from stories that, from my dad and brother who aren't trying to be mean when they tell these stories, but it's just like, I think it took me a really long time. Well, and I knew it. I mean, I remember just when it took like a year before I could like change from a G to a C chord to a D, which are like the three most primary moves if you're playing bluegrass, which obviously that was a thing too, because I still, my parents were like, oh, you play guitar now, let's like play together. And so my heart really wasn't in that back then, but that should be a pretty simple thing to do. And it took me a long time to get it down.
What was so like you just alluded to, the second you were like playing guitar, your parents were like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And maybe roped you into it a little bit.
Yeah.
And so you were like playing informally with your folks in your family a little bit. That had to have been helpful in order, just like to force you to get a little bit better as playing live, as jamming always does. I mean, that's early advice that I ever got in my fervent and 10-year period of studying the bluegrass idiom, was to just put yourself outside your comfort zone in jam circles, because you're just forced to play a little faster than you're more comfortable.
Yeah, it's the same thing of like, if you play tennis, which I don't, but like if you play tennis with somebody who's a little bit better than you, then you kind of level up your game. It's just that thing where, by just participating and being kind of held to, held to a standard that kind of says, okay, are we going to keep this thing moving forward or not? It's like that's ping pong. I've definitely played a bit of ping pong, and it's remarkable how in ping pong you can play somebody who's like so much better than you, and they're hitting, like the balls are just coming so fast, and you have no idea. Like I'm kind of when I hit a ping pong ball, there's an arc to it.
It goes up before it goes down.
It goes up before it goes down. But then you see people who like, hit ping pong balls and it's just going kind of in a straight line. And it's like you find sometimes you can actually kind of just rise to that occasion. And it's almost like, I don't know how or why that happens. Maybe it's just because that's how you keep the game going. It's like, it's more fun to do that, on some subconscious level that's there. You can do it. Rather than chasing the ball, that's gone off the table. So I think, in certain situations when we kind of push ourselves and we're pushed by other people in a participatory dynamic, you can kind of rise, you can kind of level up a little bit and do things that you didn't necessarily know that you could do.
You don't have time to tell yourself you can't.
That's right.
In a way.
Yeah.
So you were playing. I'm going to probably ask some pretty dumb questions here in my search for understanding better. But my experience, I started on electric guitar as well. And at some point when I kind of, the bluegrass truth struck me, and that's all I wanted to do, I really, my initial huge challenge was learning the just irrevocable down up of flat picking, and how that was so different from rock electric guitar playing, where it's more a matter of kind of convenient. There's not this built-in pulse in rock when you're playing with a backbeat and drums, bass, whatever, that there is in bluegrass, where everybody's kind of the rhythm section.
That's right.
And do you remember relearning? Did you learn one way and then have to learn to flat pick, or was it all kind of come together?
I don't know. I think it all maybe kind of came together at once. That's a good question. I know that when I started working with Chris Thiele years later, he started pointing out, because he's a big evangelist, and now we really are getting into the kind of dorky instrumentalist.
I know,
minutia.
but I like it so much.
I know.
Okay.
Well, I know you're down. It's everybody listening. You came to nerd.
Get your guitars out, kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Thiele has this real belief in kind of just having this down-up mechanism. He even came up with a name for it. It's a pretty good name, pick stroke theory, which says that like on, certain beats you're going to be going down, certain beats you're going to be going up, and it's just down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. If you take a rest, down, up, down, up, down, 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 up, down, up. It's like the downs would still happen where they're happening no matter what. It's just this is bad. This is bad podcasting.
I think this is okay. I think we can translate this for people with a rudimental musical understanding. You can picture quarter notes in a beat, 4/4 beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if you play eighth notes, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and the very simple way to understand flat picking is that all the downstrokes are on the quarter note. So it's 1, 2, you're going down, down, down. And all the you would call them off beats, or the eighth notes are on upstrokes. So it's down, up, down, up, down, up. Chris will show you right now.
Down, down, down. I'm just doing these 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, if we do an upstroke, we'll get twice as many notes, like on the ands. Like instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and now my hand's just going down. It was going down, down, down before, but your hand has to come back up to go down again. So it's like there's this really natural rhythm that can kind of just happen in your body when you kind of stay in alignment with this idea that your hand's just going back and forth, and that's a really natural thing to do. And it's something interesting about rhythm. It's like this is something that's kind of hardwired into all of us. If you think about like clapping, like let's say, give me some ovation, give me some applause for that amazing thing I just did. Okay, that was perfect.
Polyrhythm.
Now it's a polyrhythm. This is exactly so. Corby was going about this speed, and I'm sorry. Remind me your name again. Kyle. Okay, and Kyle was going a little slower.
He wasn't as enthusiastic.
But they were no. He was like, "What is this guitar thing?" But they were both really consistent. You could roll the tape back, and you're going to see that both of you kind of kept a consistent beat, and that happens every time anybody claps. Pretty much, it's like there's just something kind of natural about keeping a beat in all of us, and we don't. There are people who feel like I don't have rhythm, but I guarantee you, if they weren't paying any attention and you asked them to clap, or they'd kind of be doing it like this as opposed to
Nobody ever does that.
Nobody does that. So there's this thing about our bodies where we're able to kind of move with a consistent motion, and that's to kind of circle it all back around. That's kind of what your question was leading to, is it's just harnessing that innate ability, which is like one of the cool things about flat picking and cool things about a lot of string band music is that it's really, it's deeply rhythmic in its nature. Everybody in the band has to have good timing, and you kind of can leverage these like natural things about how our bodies work and how how it all happens. Yeah.
There's so many things so many directions I could go off this. So I'll pick one. One is you mentioned Chris Thiele and his technique. I mean, there's arguably no better technique, right hand or left.
Yeah.
Utterly fluid. No wasted energy. And it's been that way for a very long time. And I remember as a younger fella, maybe this is 2004. When Nickel Creek was just kind of breaking, they played Wintergrass. You've played Wintergrass, I'm sure, in Tacoma, and that was my sort of entrance into bluegrass music. And maybe I'll say an aside to an aside, but prior to that, I'd grown up not in a very musical family, but I had some aptitude for it and a deep passion for it. I was just like, I wanted to be part of it, and fell into Fish. And like as an undergrad, I transcribed Trey Anastasio guitar solos, and I was just like, Fish is it. Yeah. And then one year I went down to, I went to a guitar camp that during a summer guitar camp that I thought was just like going to be people like me, and it was all like, of course, it was like 40-year-olds on their summer vacations. Yeah. Me, like 21 years old. And there was like a little merch stand there. And I had heard Deep River Blues by Doc Watson. I was just like, whoa. And there was a tablature to how to play it. And that was my weird introduction, because there was on the tablature was on one side and then Doc Watson was on the other side. And he wasn't wearing sunglasses or anything. And I didn't know anything about him. I didn't even know he was blind. I was like, man, that guy looks crazy.
Yeah.
And but that from there, like the next year, there was some tribute or something at Wintergrass, and it was that guy Doc Watson tribute. I'm like, well, that's cool. Those people know something about that music. And I went prior to that too. I was going to rock clubs, and this whole it's like cool, beautiful children being disaffected and playing their rock and roll. And I was just like that didn't ever resonate with me. I was like, I didn't feel cool, or that's not what it was about for me.
Yeah.
And when I went into the Sheridan downtown at Wintergrass and was just like greeted with, this is like a cliche in bluegrass circles now. I mean, this is like what it is. So your people would be like, yeah, dude. And I am too, like now. But at the time, if you've never seen it, it's just like people picking and circles of people and just normal people.
Yeah.
Normal freaking people, teachers and old grandpas and 9-year-old kids in there, and everybody playing together. And the thing about bluegrass that just like knocked me over and made me unplug and not listen to anything but Stanley Brothers and Bill Monroe and Newgrass Revival for 6 or 7 years was this combination of the simplicity and accessibility of the music.
Yeah.
It's heart-centered in a way that you weren't in your head, like, in the 4-chord version or 3-chord version of bluegrass. But then the technical proficiency required to do the music was like kind of sky's the limit. You could spend your life getting. So those two things were so interesting to me. And
that's part of what makes this music so fun and why people do get so into it. Yeah, because there's a real 3 chords and the truth element to it. Like a lot of the songs, especially as as established by the first generation, Bill Monroe or the Stanley Brothers or Flatt and Scruggs, all those guys. You only need that G, C, and D chord. You only need 3 chords, and you can play like an unlimited number of songs. And you can meet people who you've never met before who also know that same song, and you can play the song with them, and you can sing in harmony. There's this element in bluegrass of harmony singing, which is kind of like baked in, where you have somebody singing lead, somebody singing tenor, and some baritone or whatever. I just confused myself, but whatever. They're 3 parts, and it's like, as long as everybody knows the song, the rules are pretty simple. Like you can get in there and you can have like a really meaningful connection. Like you actually do something cool with a stranger for hours, but also. There's this, you can just work on it. You can try and take it, to this high level. Some of the instruments like banjo is just innately, you play with 3 finger picks. And so there's this rolling pattern. It's kind of easy to play fast on banjo. Mm-hmm. It's this virtuosic sound, and they're remarkable virtuosos, but it's also like the entry to getting this kind of crazy sound is not that high, actually. And so, it's just, it's inviting you. It's saying, all right, this is kind of crazy. It's like you're making this punk sound that you didn't really know, that you could do. And it just kind of, I don't know, man, I'm sorry. I'm freezing up here.
No, totally. Well, I will just to bring it to, I mentioned Philly, and then I say Philly, it's Thiele. Yeah. But going to Wintergrass, and one year the Nickel Creek came and played, and I was just like, this is so dorky. I could not stop looking at his right wrist.
Yeah.
It was just so fluid. This is pretty esoteric, Kyle. Try to hang on. But yeah, it's just like that. And that made me just really want to iron out all the kinks in my own picking. And it's interesting because I was very serious about it. And I had a
Were you
working
a mandolin player?
guitar, flat picking guitar.
Okay.
I mean, I was really, I wasn't a singer, you know,
Yeah.
that's but I was kind of a singer who always wanted to be the guitar player.
But when people get into bluegrass, they often get into it's like part of the fun is the pursuit of the virtuosity.
Yeah.
thing. It's like that's because you can play the songs and then in your spare time you work on playing a fiddle tune or whatever, and it's hard,
it's hard, and it's also like there's a perfection mindset too. Of like as soon as you get that metronome out, and you're really just like trying to dial down. And for me, it was such an interesting journey of like, okay, I can play this solo, this Tony Rice solo at like 96 beats per minute. But then like, why does it start to break down? And by like 120, I cannot do it. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And that whole pursuit is a lifelong pursuit. Some people never hit it. I really never did. I had a working bluegrass band right out of college that was regionally successful, and it was why I was able to play music, and it's led me here, in a way. And along the way, it's funny because like when I was in the Northwest, I knew all the young pickers. There was a time when we started playing right after like our second show or something, the Oh Brother soundtrack dropped, and at that time there weren't like a lot of young Hot Buttered Rum. Maybe they hadn't come out yet. Yonder was there was a couple of years later.
Yeah.
And so there was like nobody doing it. And so all the young kids, we found each other, young 20 somethings. And so I was able to, I played in that music a lot. And then when I moved to Nashville, well, let's say that I also did other kinds of music into my own shows. The band was great. They were, I was the worst person in the band, but they were like talented, more virtuosic than me. But we played like a little bit more like Americana rock, and then in the middle of the set, break it down and play like some straight up bluegrass. And the organist could really play fiddle well and stuff like that. And when I moved to Nashville, I tried to do that too, and really quick, people were like, maybe if you're trying to play the bluegrass, people are going to think that's what they're going to think that's what you do, and you don't do it like Critter Eldridge does it, but it was really true. And the point is that I'm not a Tony Rice guitar player, but all of that work influenced my music, and to this day has made me, I'm a singer-songwriter, but for a singer-songwriter, I've got, some method, some wheels, some means, and that all came out of that pursuit of really wanting to play bluegrass at a high level. So that's what's wonderful about the music. One of the many things that's wonderful about it, the challenging aspect.
I think it just invites you to grow. It invites you to it's folk music that kind of invites you to keep pushing yourself. And if you're kind of in a mindset, I think, of pushing yourself regularly, then I think that can kind of extend to other things. It's like what are some other cool chords? Like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. To me, like any kind of pushing that I do manifests not just in the specific spot where I'm pushing. It's mm-hmm. like it's almost like you kind of learn to work in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the pushing thing, because you mentioned, so we talked about the string dusters, and then you moved on to the Punch Brothers, and you were let's just say like a hot shit guitar player then, and maybe what that I'm hazarding, I guess, as to what the Punch Brothers brought. I mean, apart from, getting to play with these great musicians that I'm sure you knew really well, the chord progressions were starting to be, and the arrangements were a whole nother animal. Yeah. And that was my gut feeling, is that was an aspect of a new kind of pushing yourself. Yeah. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, hugely so. I mean, when I, the String Dusters was a really cool band. Like that band formed kind of around the nucleus of me and Chris Pandolfi and Andy Hall. And mm-hmm. we had another band when I was in college that was put together by our friend Zach Hickman. Do you know Zach?
Yeah, he's up in Boston now. Yeah. Zach, I love Zach.
Zach's an amazing guy. He went to Oberlin, where I went to school, and he's played with Josh Ritter for many years, but done all kinds of cool stuff. and he's always like creating projects. Zach is as you know, Zach is a project guy.
Yeah.
And so he created this bluegrass band. He graduated from Oberlin. He was a senior when I was a freshman, moved to Boston, met Pandolfi. Andy had just left, but he was like this great dobro player. And he was like, all right, I just met Critter, at Oberlin. I'm going to put these guys together. We're going to start a band called Stable Horse. And he did. And we made this little EP. It was like real rough. But we played, we'd play shows at Oberlin and do tiny little, 1 week long tours around the East Coast, kind of in the summers. We did that for a couple of years, and it was a really fun band. And I think, after I was going to graduate, I was the youngest of the bunch by a couple of years. We were going to move to Nashville and start a band. But Zach wasn't bought into that idea. He was playing with Ritter, very full time. And so, Andy and Pandolfi and I were like, well, we're doing it. We're going to go to Nashville. And meanwhile, Andy'd already moved here. He met Jeremy Garrett and originally Alan Bartram. You know Alan, who plays bass with the Del McCurry band now.
Oh, okay.
And Jesse Cobb too, great mandolin player. These are all wonderful musicians. And we started this band of these kind of like hotshot young players. And we wanted to have like a Three Musketeers vibe of like all for one, one for all, we're gonna start this thing. It's gonna be cool. And that's what we did. Everybody, we all pushed ourselves. Everybody was such a good musician. And it was wonderful. But, around that same time, I connected with Chris Thiele, who, I hate to throw this word around, but, Thiele's he's like a generational talent, I mean, he won a MacArthur grant, he's
a once in a lifetime.
He's kind of a crazy, he's anomaly of a musician. And we're the same age, and he started showing me some of the stuff that he was up to, and he showed us, me and Noam Pekelny, who's also amazing, lived here in Nashville at the time. We had this one night with Thiele where we got together and he was showing us this thing that he was writing, and Noam and I kind of on the spot came up with some parts that I think really excited Thiele because he wasn't imagining things like that, but they were cool. Mm-hmm. And so I think he was like, wow, okay, this, there could be some neat stuff here. And we just kind of had the opportunity, I had the opportunity to kind of join up with Thiele, who had been playing in Nickel Creek for a long time, and he loved Nickel Creek, but Nickel Creek had in a way the curse of becoming popular, where you have somebody who's bursting with the amount of musical brilliance that Thiele had, especially at that time, because they've, their new record's amazing. It's like just this really cool thing. They're on the road right now after a, long hiatus. Mm-hmm. But, they'd had some like commercial success, and I think he was feeling just locked down by that. And he just wanted to, write this classical suite for bluegrass instruments, stretching, using harmony, out of the like Bartok and Debussy playbooks. Mm-hmm. And now I was just like, the possibility of being along for that ride and kind of expanding my horizons with someone like that who was so brilliant, but also so fired up to push himself. It just kind of felt like, man, I've got to do this. This is how I want to grow. To me, one of the big things about music is growth. Like, this is one of the reasons that you keep coming back to it. Is it's this avenue to continue to grow. Mm-hmm. I think in life, I think probably all want to continue to grow. I mean, I think that's one of the things that just keeps you getting out of bed every morning is some kind of growth. And it could be personal growth. It could be any number of kinds of things. You could be a scientist and trying to figure out some crazy thing that you're working on, or an artist or whatever it is, But in my case, music was like the main vehicle for growth. And this was this chance to grow in ways that I was not capable of imagining myself at the time. If there's a through line to the many disparate guests that are on this podcast, and what the theme really of this is about the inherent worth
of the creative journey for the journeyer.
Yeah.
And that to me is it's all bound up in growth, whether it's music or film or just pursuing anything in an intense and intentional and purposeful way is part of the calling of art, lest you fall back on your laurels and you start duplicating the safe things, which is always a possibility.
Yeah.
It's easy to succumb to that. And there's another corollary to this too, to me, which is that, I'm, my mid 40s and this is a whole new journey for me, and it's uncomfortable a little bit. And that's part of what makes it exciting and frightening a little bit, and alive. Yeah. And I don't think that growth can occur without discomfort.
No, you need discomfort. Like that's one of the kind of core things. If you're not uncomfortable, I just don't really think you're growing.
Absolutely.
You have to, and it's like you learn by failing. And I think as we get older, I think it's easy to forget about that. It's easy to get settled in. It's easy to learn what it feels like to not have problems. Mm-hmm. We all have problems, but like they don't feel good. And we can kind of calcify into something that we know works and doesn't push us. But it's interesting. So, I've got a 21-month-old daughter now, and it's really cool just watching her learn. This has just kind of been an ongoing theme, and it's I just watch her grow and learn all the time. Mm-hmm. But I also, if you kind of watched her purely objectively from moment to moment and we're keeping track of every time she did something unsuccessfully, just with like a, succeeded, failed. Mm-hmm. It's like the failure level on what she's trying to do, like talking right now. She works on talking. She's actually gotten a lot, that's really blown up in the last little bit. But for the longest time, a child babbles, she babbles and it's nonsense, and she's working on it. And obviously we know nobody's judging her for that. But I'm just saying, if you actually did think of the process of learning to talk from like a success or failure mode where you judged each event, it would be nothing. It would be, it'd be like, 10,000 failures and maybe one success, mm-hmm. For a long time. And then you start getting the second success, but or falling over. Like, when she first started to walk or crawl or anything that we all know babies do and we don't think about it. But if you do think of from this other angle, they're failing and they're learning. They get a little more data every time. And I think that's been really cool for me to remember, like through watching Ever, I remember that, this is how learning happens. And she's so young, she hasn't learned that it's not good to fail.
I'm saying stigma.
I'm saying that with air quotes, there's, because obviously we're having this conversation and we're extolling the virtues of like failure and discomfort. But I think as we get older, it's really easy to kind of lose sight of that. Mm. And that's kind of where it's at. So yeah, either on that level or just as we can put ourselves in situations that we don't know how to, succeed at, that's how you kind of learn to succeed at it. You learn how to kind of transcend your own boundaries.
And so that's what Feely offered with Punch Brothers. This is new opportunity to transcend boundaries.
Yeah.
It's fair to say.
Yeah.
And are there any records coming out? Are you guys, I know that I want to talk about Mighty Poplar in a second, but is the band, I'm sure the band is like, the band's going to be around for the rest of your lives.
I hope so. Yeah. I think so. We just finished wrapping this really, really intense project. You're talking about pushing yourself. This was actually the hardest, in a way, this was the hardest I've almost ever pushed myself. So we have this new show called the Energy Curfew Music Hour. And we did it with Audible, partnered with Audible. Mm. And it's going to be kind of like a variety show. So for anybody listening, Thiele used to host a Prairie Home Companion, which was then rebranded as Live from Here. But that was like a, big NPR, kind of flagship NPR show for a long time. Originally hosted by Garrison Keillor. Yeah, it was
legendary show.
Yeah, huge. And when Garrison Keillor retired, he handed it to Thiele. Now Thiele's a musician, not a storyteller or writer in that same way, but he kind of made it into this music show. But it was always a little bit of an awkward fit because, he was inheriting this big show with all this legacy, and there were forces from on high that were like, well, no, this show needs to have drums, and Thiele's like, I'm an acoustic musician. It shall have drums. And so the show had drums, but for this, I think there were a lot of things where the good lessons from the variety show format were internalized, because I think if you do have music, it can benefit from a relief into talking if the talking is interesting, and vice versa. There's just something to that format. It's disarming, and also the show takes place in a slightly I don't want to call it dystopian because in a way it's utopian. But it's this future where energy has been rationed. Climate change has necessitated some real changes in the way that we all live as a society. And there's this one day a week called the dark day where power is rationed, the grid powers back up and whatever. Science fiction fans don't check it too hard because I don't know if it totally bears all that scrutiny. But it's the conceit of the show. And so our show is the last thing that happens. It's a broadcast to everybody kind of before the grid goes down, and you have this really connected to the earth kind of day. So yeah, that's the show we made, and we got to collaborate.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it a weekly show? Is it a serial show?
We taped 8 episodes, and I'm not sure how they're going to be released. I mean, each one was just an enormous amount of work. But we were collaborating with other cool musicians, so we'd be their band, like James Taylor. I got to hang out and play guitar with James Taylor, awesome. For 8 hours over the course of a couple days, which was a highlight. And let's see, Isbell did it, and Nora Jones, John Baptiste, Wolfpack, the Wolfpack guys were there. Casey Musgraves. It was and on and on. I mean, there's just Maddie Cunningham, Louis Cato. I mean, it was crazy. Wow. And it was super fun.
But it's like a variety show format, kind of like Live from Here was.
Yeah. And so there'd be these recurring bits. There was this, and they're not all gonna. I think the show is gonna be edited down to 1 hour, and then we would, each show would be range anywhere from an hour and 20 minutes to 2 hours plus. But, there was a recurring bit called the Rube Goldberg variations, playing on, obviously, the Rube Goldberg machines, and the Goldbox Goldberg variations, which are these, really amazing pieces that Bach wrote for this wealthy guy back in the day. And so we would, there'd be a script about some crazy Rube Goldberg-esque machine that was used to harvest rainwater to do whatever, And then behind that, 2 or 3 of us would be playing a Goldberg variation. So I suck at reading music. I'm not really able to read. But I'd have to learn these Rube Goldberg variations, essentially memorize them, getting back to my hotel in New York at, 9, 10 p.m. and start working on memorizing this thing, from this is after a 12-hour day of working together at the show, and then just eat dinner or chill for an hour, and then until 1 a.m. just work on memorizing the Bach. I mean, these days were insane. You talk about pushing yourself. I've never pushed myself like that, but in the end, I'm really proud of what we made. It was it was a huge lift. Kind of one of the hardest, most draining things I've ever done. Probably the most hardest or most draining, but it was really cool, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of them. We did it. I haven't actually heard any of the playback from any of it, but it'll be out, and hopefully it'll be cool.
pushing yourself beyond,
dude.
and
You
being
got
uncomfortable.
You got to do it. Yeah.
Speaking of being uncomfortable, let's maybe transition and play a song. And I'm wondering if we could maybe do the one we talked about on the phone that you did for the Doc tribute.
Oh yeah.
Little Sadie. And we had a small conversation about this, about some feedback you got about this. And I've thought about it a lot too. And I wondered if we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe you could set it up with however you will.
Yeah. Well, so this song, Little Sadie, is it's a traditional song that has been recorded and sung by countless people, recorded hundreds of times. I mean, because it's this like super classic traditional American song. And I was asked to record it for this Doc Watson 100th anniversary or centennial of his birth. This record called Doc at 100, and it's a murder ballad. Like the first line of the song, the narrator says, "Went out one night to make a little round and met Little Sadie and I shot her down. Went back home, got into bed, 44 pistol under my head." So it's this like really cold-blooded kind of crazy thing. And the song goes on and he goes on a run and they catch him eventually and he gets thrown in jail for, probably the rest of his natural life. So that's the context of what the song is. And I got, somebody reached out to me and said that they were very uncomfortable with hearing this song because I'd been performing it with my new band, Mighty Poplar. We'd played it live because we, came up with a new arrangement and liked the music and everything. And it was really interesting. She had this really good faith. We had this, nice little exchange about it, but she basically said that it just made her very uncomfortable hearing a song where, so casually there's a man just perpetrating violence on another person. And she, she kind of said like, it makes me question, following, I'm paraphrasing, but, following you or supporting you, because, it makes me wonder, what is actually in this person's heart that they're singing this song from a position of power in the sense that I, play music for a living and I'm in front of people and I can play other songs. And it's really interesting. And it's made me kind of question that myself, singing songs like this. And I actually have some thoughts about it, but I don't know. I want to let you kind of jump in. That's kind of the quick setup.
I mean, just to underscore this, Little Sadie is a bluegrass standard as much as there is one, and it comes from a tradition for the uninitiated of what's called a murder ballad, which is a trope of songs that have this kind of theme. Often it's a man doing violence to a woman, I think more often than not. And these songs go back so far that nobody knows who wrote them. Nobody knows who wrote Little Sadie. And consequently, maybe due their ancient origin, people sing them without thinking about what's being said. I think that's fair to say. I this didn't even occur to me when I suggested, because we'd had this conversation, because I was like, hey man, maybe we could play this song, Little Sadie. I know this song, maybe. And you're like, yeah, funny thing about that song.
Yeah.
And it made me go like, oh yeah, that's some tough material. And I started singing that song 20 years ago and never thought twice about it. So there's one thought is that music is a living tradition. And with what's exciting about bluegrass, one of the things that's unifying about it is that it has this repertoire of common songs that, like you said earlier, people who've never met before can come together and play these songs. And that's incredibly powerful. It's why people love the Great American Songbook. Jazz trios can get together and, play around midnight, never having met. Some of these songs are of of violent nature. And so the other side of that is because it's a living tradition, each new generation hears these songs in new ways. And so there's my first take, and I throw it back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting thing. People do hear them in different ways. And I think, there have been some songs that as time has gone on, we've collectively agreed to let go of. Mm-hmm. Like there are a bunch of songs from the old time tradition, which is distinct from bluegrass. By the way, just a little historical, footnote is that bluegrass is only 80 some odd years old. It was really born in the 1940s. Right around the same time that bebop was. And we think of bebop as being this kind of sophisticated, it's been around now for a long time, but it's this very sophisticated music. And we think of bluegrass as this ancient thing. But bluegrass actually was music made for the stage, by Bill Monroe and kind of synthesized from all these certain ingredients. But if you go back kind of to the string band music that kind of led to bluegrass, the kind of primordial stuff, you have string band music, old time music, songs that were played by, black and white string bands from the, stretching back into the 1800s. And for all I know, earlier than that, but certainly we know in the 1800s and early 1900s. And there are a lot of those songs that have like some, very odious racial undertones. And these are songs that collectively, I think all but the most hardcore, historical music nerds have just said, yeah, these ones, we're letting these
Retire.
go. I don't want anything to do with any of this,
Yeah.
The music is cool. And the music, is really actually in terms of that, I mean, it really is true that music and string band music was actually this really cool racial melting pot back in the day. Like I think a lot of music was born of black and white musicians kind of hanging out. There were just poor folks and they played music together. But, we look at that now and there are a lot of these songs that we're just not going to touch with a 10-foot pole, rightfully so. I'm certainly down with that. So
just to boil it down, like we can see there's a line that everyone agrees.
Yeah.
There is a line, and there's on one side of the line is songs that are done. We're not going to play them.
Yeah. And so the question is like, how is that line changed? How, where's that, is that line moving to encompass other things? Are we now starting to question, singing murder ballads or just question, I don't think you have to speak of it in that grand or sweeping of a statement, but it's like, yeah, you start thinking about how do you feel about this, and how do other people feel about this, and just kind of where are we with that?
I mean, I think that just to, I guess underscore that the line's moving. I mean, it's a living conversation. It's a debate, as it should be. I think I think the jury's still out. And maybe 5 years from now or 50 years from now, people will look back and be like, I can't believe that nice kids were playing murder ballads like Little Sadie.
Right.
And I'm so glad that we're not doing that anymore.
Right.
Like who knows? Or maybe people might say, the truth is probably like, it's not ever going to be a wholly answered question, or it's unlikely to be in that case. But here's another thought about that is, I remember reading an essay written by Stephen King when I was in 8th grade, maybe. And, he talked about, and I had never read a Stephen King novel, and I have read a few since, but not until very recently. And that time I wasn't interested in it, and I was like, horror, that's just, I don't want to live in horror. But he was making an argument for horror. And he said, everybody's got a well in their basement, and in the bottom of the well there's some alligators splashing around. Everybody's got that. And the thing is that the alligators, for most people, don't get out. And one of the ways to keep the alligators where they belong is to throw some meat down there now and then. And consequently, that was, that's what horror is for him. That's the service that he argued it provided. I'm not going to say that the analogy is a direct comparison, but I think there's something to be said for framing the darker impulses of humanity in a safe context, and that's one of the things that art does. So you can sing about something that is horrible, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're celebrating it, or that you're going to do it now. It's a way of sort of acknowledging that these things happen. There's that piece of it. There's another, like, a little bit more of a pointy-headed take on it, which is involves the Jungian concept of the shadow self. And one of the arguments that Carl Jung, famous psychologist, made about, like, the soul that's fully integrated is the one that acknowledges the shadow of himself. And I think that you could extrapolate that from the individual to society at large and say that a society that doesn't acknowledge its shadow self is doomed to commit horrors in the long run, because it's ignoring something that's basic to the reality of being human. And that another thing that art could be said to provide is a temporal and safe acknowledgement of the shadowy parts of human behavior, to acknowledge them and say, yep, there that is. We can all agree that we can understand what's going on. The character in Little Sadie gets his comeuppance, you know. Something they don't always resolve that way, though.
No, sometimes they're just brutal. Sometimes
they're brutal,
crazy. Yeah.
And so, I mean, so, like, there's, you know, if so, you could say there's the Murder Ballad on the one side, and then from that, there's just the litany of bad things portrayed in art is without end. You know, and we all kind of go to rough movies to see things that are horrible.
Yeah.
People do that, and so, I think there's a fair argument to be made for, like, why.
Yeah.
You know, just as there is a fair argument to be made for, like, why keep singing these songs. So
right.
I think it's just a living question.
I think that was a very eloquent and well thought out idea. Yeah. I mean, I think you're totally right. I think these old songs, they're almost like cautionary tales in a way, I think. And there's also something about, I think part of the reason that murder ballads are still with us, and the reason that they've kind of been so effective at surviving, is there's something powerful about how shocking they are. Like these cold-blooded characters, these cold-blooded acts. It's kind of a safe way to behold something, like you're saying, kind of like the shadow self. It's a safe way to kind of, take a look at things that otherwise, if it was too real, it'd be too scary to think about, but it's real in a way. You know, by my singing that song is, like, obviously I just do not endorse. I've never successfully punched anybody, even when I was a boy, in fifth grade. And my friend Andrew was, like, pummeling me because we got into a fight, and he actually started hitting me. I couldn't hit him. I never actually landed a real, so singing that song for me is, I don't think it's a celebration or an endorsement of that violence. But, I do think that it, somewhat unexamined. I mean, I actually thought about, before I recorded the song for the Doc record, I actually really did think, like, should I sing this song? Like, I think nowadays we have a good sense of, trauma, PTSD is something that we've just kind of talked about more as a society. I don't know how everybody's read, The Body Keeps the Score, these, like,
I haven't, but I'm a rube.
Well, not everybody. I mean, but, like, I have, and a lot of people I know have read this book that's essentially about trauma. It's like, it's something that acknowledging trauma is sort of in the zeitgeist. And so with that background, I kind of questioned, like, man, should I do this song? Should I try and find another song? And ultimately, I also just love the music of Little Sadie, and I've always loved the music. It's got this really kind of modal, spooky vibe. And, I kind of felt that it's okay. I'm not actually endorsing this thing, but, in the end, someone, at least one person was, troubled by it. Mm-hmm. And we can't live our whole lives, I don't think, trying to completely shield everybody from everything. But it was just a good reminder for me of like, I don't want anybody to suffer or feel badly. And these things, can affect people. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, and I've continued to sing the song, and I think we're going to sing it today. So
I think we're going to sing it right now.
I think we're going to sing it right now. Yeah. Shall we sing it?
Let's do it.
Don't do the thing that the guy in this song did.
Don't try this at home.
Don't try this at home.
Went out one night for to make a little round, and I met Little Sadie and I blowed her down. Went back home and I got in the bed, 44 pistol under my head. Woke up the next morning about 9:30, and the hacks and the buggies are all standing in line. The gents and gamblers were standing around, carrying Little Sadie to her burying ground. Well, I began to think about the deed I'd done, so I grabbed my hat and away I run. Made a good run, but a little too slow. Overtook me in Jericho. I was standing on the corner reading the bill when up stepped the sheriff from Thomasville. Said, "Young man, ain't your name Brown? Remember the night shot Sadie down?" I said, "Yes, sir, my name is Lee, and I murdered Little Sadie in the first degree. First degree, second degree. Got any papers, won't you read them to me?" They took me downtown, dressed me in black, and they put me on the train and started me back. All the way back to that Thomasville jail, where I had no money for to go my bail. And the jury took their stand. The judge held the papers in his right hand. 41 days, 41 nights, 41 years to wear the ball and strike. Yeah.
I think there's a lot to that. Like the shadow self and the not, and I think culture, what we're dealing with right now, some of the convulsions are happening, or this push and pull with that. There's kind of some effort to expunge the nastier part of human nature, and as though it doesn't exist. A
crazy thing is as time goes on, I think people do forget about what they had to fight against. What am I trying to think of? I was listening to a good podcast a few weeks ago, and they were talking about this. I think when a struggle has happened and successfully been conquered, as time goes on, whatever it was that you were struggling against becomes so out of mind that you don't realize that it can happen. Like, for instance, authoritarianism. That's just something that seems like so
of another time, and
but it's something that people have really dealt with and like fought wars around, and here we are, facing it kind of all over the Western world, like the rise of leaders, authoritarian leaders who promise some sort of authoritarian rule, and people are like, this seems great, let's go for it. And there's a certain kind of amnesia. It's like people just forget how gnarly that sort of thing can be. And so I do think that, while I don't think anybody's going to forget that, murder is bad, there's something about keeping some of that stuff alive in people's mind that I think actually is sort of valuable.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, to me, I'm a big student of history, and a part of my overall campaign to understand myself and my place in the universe in this context in time and history, one of those efforts has been to study the past, and that is invaluable. What do they say? People who forget the past are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
There's so much to that.
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's exactly right.
So I'm not sure that of the historical, I'm not sure of the impact of Little Sadie on our time and place, but it was a fun pick. And after all that heavy talk, let's talk about Mighty Poplar for a second.
Yeah.
And, what prompted that? How did you guys get together? Did that come out of late night picks over many years and meeting up here and there on festivals, or was it purposeful?
Kind of. So Mighty Poplar is me and Noam Pikelny, who also plays in Punch Brothers, and Alex Hargraves, who plays fiddle with Billy Strings, and Andrew Marlin, who's the kind of main singer and kind of songwriter behind Watch House. Used to be called Mandolin Orange, but they're Watch House. And Greg Garrison plays bass with Leftover Salmon, but actually was an original member of Punch Brothers, although we haven't played. Greg left the band about 16 years ago.
Wow.
So it's been a long, long time. So we all knew each other in various ways. I've known Alex. So Alex is probably, I'm the youngest member. No, I guess actually Andrew's in his 30s. So Alex is probably like 30, 31 years old. I've known Alex since he was about 10, probably, at Wintergrass. I first met him at Wintergrass. And I've known Andrew, probably for close to 10 years now. We just would hang out at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival when his band was playing and my band was playing. And, at Telluride, there's this wonderful thing. Well, like we were talking about, you walked into Wintergrass and you saw these people picking. So, the musicians at Telluride often will hang out, have like parties at night and just hang out and pick and play music. And there's nobody more hardcore in that way than Andrew Marlin. I mean,
he'll stay to the end.
Oh, dude, Marlin is, yeah. And so I met Marlin, at houses, and I'd wander in at 1:30 and Marlin would be there picking, and, had a few times over the years where we were just there till, the sun just about came up. Just had a lot of fun. And so there was, and we all had, that's just everything from my perspective, but we all had these webs. We all knew each other. Yeah. And the pandemic hit and we were all stuck at home. And I think it was maybe Greg who had this idea of like, well, let's just get together. Let's make a bluegrass record. We all grew up with that music. We all grew up loving that music. Let's make a record. And so I think he'd talked to maybe Noam and Andrew, and they kind of all put their heads together. And I was brought in. They were like, "Hey, do you want to maybe make a bluegrass record? Would that be a fun thing?" And Alex, so we it was this thing that was just all sort of theoretical. We'd never actually the five of us been in a room together. And we huddled up here in Nashville in October 2020 and just longing to pick, longing to be with other people, but also just have that like, just to play music. Because you, as a person who's played bluegrass, know that there's something just so unique and beautiful about getting into a good bluegrass situation and playing with folks that, you know, you can play along with a record all day or just play by yourself. It's not going to do the thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just, you know, came up with the songs over text message. Turns out Andrew, you know, has like a billion cool songs up his sleeve. I had a few and Noam had some. And so, yeah, we all just kind of got together, made this record, and it was, we recorded it. We did it in a studio, but I don't think we had any expectations for any of it. It was just kind of like, let's do this. We'll record it.
The studio is an excuse to get together.
It's an excuse to get together. And then when we kind of listened back, it was like, whoa, actually, I really like this. Are you like this too? It's like, yeah, I actually really like this. It's got a vibe. So we were kind of all surprised that it just kind of had this really magical vibe. And I think part of it is that at least on that record, we've played a lot of shows now, but at least on that record, there was just this spirit of just joy. I think because we'd hardly rehearsed before we got in front of the mics. I mean, just barely. Mm-hmm. You're kind of hearing the joy of it's that stuff that's kind of a little nebulous. It's like floats in the ether, but it's vibe. Mm-hmm. You know, there's that vibe of us all just kind of feeling good and discovering each other and having fun playing music. And I think it kind of got onto tape somehow. Yeah. And so I'm really proud of it. And we, like I said, we didn't set out to do anything, but we were just proud of what got captured. And so we've been playing shows now, and it's been really fun.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great example of this other side of the creative journey. We've talked about you must be uncomfortable to grow side, which is absolutely true. But then there's this other thing. It's like, it's also really fun to just do what you know how to do. Yeah. And just enjoy that part of it. It's not always.
I haven't gotten to do that in so long. I mean, it's kind of since the String Dusters, I mean, Punch is like relentlessly just like, we will grow, we're going to grow. And, I have my other kind of big music project that that was pretty defining for me was working in a duo with Julian Lage, who's like, guitar genius, from the jazz world. Yes. But he, and Julian's just really one of my best friends in the world. Like that's as much about being with Julian as anything. Although as a guitar player, you can't, look at Julian. It's like, I get to play in a duo with this guy.
He's an intimidating talent.
He is. But what's wild about Julian, is that I've never, ever felt better about my own, about myself as a guitar player than when I'm playing with Julian, who I kind of, I think Julian's going to be remembered historically like the greats who kind of transcend time. Like, I think Julian's like our guy for this era, in terms of that. I mean, he's so good. And so there's just something that he's got that's so beautiful. And so I'm always hesitant, especially with my friends, to put them on a pedestal. But Julian's really special, and it could be very intimidating. But with him, it speaks to his gift. Is that I've always felt just so strong myself when I play with him. Not all musicians do that, Not all musicians.
How did that? I was thinking about this, and I'm glad you brought it up. I wrote his name down here as a topic in my little notepad. How did that change the way you play? Because his approach comes out, we were talking earlier about flat picking and how inherently rhythmic it is. Yeah. And his world isn't that. It's a little bit. I don't know what the adjective is. It's not softer or squishier or less militant. It's not that. All of these are the wrong words.
No, militant. There can be a militancy, I think, to flat picking, to that kind of like dugga 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 da. And Julian definitely doesn't have that. I mean, he's coming from a tradition where it's less essential that the guitar player is like a really impeccable timekeeper. where like the sense of the time of the music is coming in part from the guitar player. In string band music, everybody's responsible for the time. So the way that manifests as a guitar player is, you wind up having this mechanism that we were talking about earlier. But for Julian, I don't think that was it. I think he was, influenced by a lot of blues players, a lot of that kind of thing when he was very young. But then, horn players in jazz, I think horn players have this thing where the phrasing of the musical phrases that come out are more connected to the breath than they are to any kind of sense of that. And horn players influenced all of jazz. So it's not just that he only ever listened to horn players. Horn players influenced piano players who influenced, whatever. Everybody's influenced. But I think that world that he comes from is a lot more able to kind of stretch and breathe and phrase in the same way that we phrase when we're speaking, in English or whatever.
Yeah, I want to say the horn ethos floats on top of the rhythm section, and that would influence even if you're playing on a different instrument, you're not pushing the music forward or like slotting it. Yeah, maybe that's the word I was looking for. With the bluegrass thing. Everybody's in the slot kind of.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Yeah,
and you don't have that, and that is a restriction in its way. And so
totally.
That live session, the Pace session of you guys, it's just such a joy to watch. Anybody who's interested in guitar playing, and especially like kind of two different worlds coming together, would be well served to watch that. It's just exhilarating and very joyful. But yeah,
I love Julian so much. I miss him terribly. And yeah, it's so inspiring to hear, because living my life, as a musician and, buying into certain ideas, like about like the time needing to be a certain way. It's really liberating to be with somebody who actually just doesn't see it that way at all.
I bet.
And also trying to come together and making music together with them and finding that middle ground. It was, you talk about growth. I mean, playing with Julian is just like a tremendous source of growth for me and joyful growth. That's in a way, it's like the best of all worlds, because things really expanded out. But they expanded without tons of labor. I mean, there's a lot of work, a lot of labor, but there's just something so inherently joyful about realizing that you can do something in a way that you haven't previously done it. That there's, sometimes for myself, I can be really bullheaded and really stubborn and really tenacious, where I can just bang my head against a wall. And it's like, I'm going to bang my head against this wall until I knock the wall down. And sometimes that works, but eventually you encounter a wall that's just like, you can't knock this wall down. And I feel like one of the big lessons that I learned from Julian, and I think one of the things that Julian like lives his life by, is if he encounters that kind of situation, he's going to say, oh, okay, this is a really tough wall. Can I get around the wall some other way? He's just so quick to not shark away or shy away from a real challenge, but he's just so smart about how he does that. So I feel like through hanging with him, I've really learned a lot about challenging my own assumptions and thinking, is there another way to do something that I think otherwise would be impossible? But it's like, oh no, it's possible. It's just impossible the way you're doing it.
Finding a new and a different approach is
totally.
What's that analogy of bending? The bamboo that bends in the wind stays, perseveres, and the oak, the resilient oak breaks in the storm because it doesn't learn how to bend.
That's it.
Dude, this has been a little bit longer than an hour, but man, this has been so great to talk to you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
It's so inspiring to hear, the past, present, and future. And I feel like you, it's just going to be, you're so young, and who knows where your next chapter is headed. And it's just going to be fun to be a part of it and from the side, or to have you back on the podcast, or whatever turns out. It's just been really great, and I'm very excited for you.
Oh, thank you so much, Corby. It's so nice to have you here. And this podcast, the stuff you've done. I mean, can we just have a moment of Corby appreciation?
Well, it's
like Morse code. Morse code is so cool. I mean, I feel like Kristen and I have talked about you as being kind of a beacon of kind of just jumping in and deciding to do something that at least from the outside seems like it came from left field. And just going for it tenaciously and not just half-heartedly. I mean, like you have such an amazing ability to take things and see them through. And so I don't know if you realize this, but there are a lot of us who just kind of admire you and kind of look to you in kind of a,
I don't know about.
No, I'm serious. And like in terms of just like, that's how you do it. That's actually living the life that, you know, you kind of like signed up for when you were like, okay, I'm not going to go work at the bank, or I'm not going to go get a law degree or whatever. It's like you live it and you do it in this really beautiful way.
Well, we're all finding our way here. And, you know, when you were talking about Julian and his approach, the wall analogy is really great. And I think in some ways, my whole creative journey has been, you know, a pivot after a pivot and finding a way through. Like I said, you know, I really wanted to be fucking Tony Rice and then Norman Blake. And yeah, exactly. And then it was like, okay, that's not going to happen. But there's something here I need to know. And so it's just like, we're all trying to figure out our thing, and it's refuse
like,
to quit.
It's like, it's the thing that Tony told me, because, you know, Tony was my mentor. I was very lucky in that sense. And, you know, this is advice. This is something we all know, but it's just so true. I mean, it's your biggest strengths are born of your biggest weaknesses. Like you try and do something, you find that you can't do it. And however you wind up solving that problem or kind of pivoting, that's usually where you find a thing that, you know, of all the possible solutions, you know, however you narrow that down to figure out what you're going to do to move forward after you kind of say, okay, in his case, I can't be Clarence White. You know, it's like everything kind of naturally comes together, and it's like he was on his path to become Tony Rice, to bring it all together in the way that was like uniquely his. It's like out of that weakness comes the opportunity for you to actually become truly strong.
Yeah. I've learned a lot today.
Likewise.
Thanks for coming, man. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks.
Is that right there?
Yeah.
1, 2.
jail. I got high and I got in jail. I got high, I got in jail. Had no money for to go my bail. My sins, they have overtaken me. Hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. I'm gonna leave on the morning train. My sins, they have overtaken me. Take one. Fair. All the beans was tough and the meat was fair. Well, the beans was tough and the meat was fat. Oh, good God, I couldn't eat that. My sins, they have overtaken me. Yeah. Hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. I'm gonna leave on the morning train. My sins, they have overtaken me. Oh, Lord. I got it. Tennessee. Well, if I die in East Tennessee, yes, if I die in Tennessee, send me back by COD. My sins, they have overtaken me. Yeah. Hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. Hand me down my walking cane. I'm gonna leave on the morning train. My sins, they have overtaken me. Take us home.
Hey, thanks for watching. Go ahead and click here to like and subscribe. You can click right there to watch another video, or click here to watch a playlist featuring the songs of the Morse Code podcast. Okay, thank you very much.